Monetary inflation is a situation where too much money chases too few goods and services. It is a situation where the money supply is ample. On the contrary, the availability of goods and services is very limited. It is a situation where money supply exceeds the value of GDP. It means the total money in circulation is greater than the value of GDP. For example, money supply be $2 billion and the GDP is of $1 billion. So obviously, the people are having more money as compared to the availability of goods and services in the market, which obviously would create a shortage of goods and services. And due to the shortage, prices will start to go up. Like all other prices, interest rate is the price of money. When money supply will increase, obviously that would cast a downward pressure on interest rate. This simply means that when central bank is increasing the money supply and commercial banks are having greater money balances with themselves, then in order to create a demand for credit, they will compromise on interest rate. And when interest rate will go down, that would definitely discourage savings and will encourage borrowing. Look at the current diagram carefully. I have labeled interest rate on the y-axis and quantity of money on the x-axis. This diagram is showing a demand for money curve which is downward sloping, and it is showing two supply curves of money which are upward sloping. You can see in the diagram that money supply curve is shifting rightward, showing that money supply is increasing. When money supply is increasing, you can see that interest rate is going down. Initially, the equilibrium interest rate was IR1, but when later on money supply increased, interest rate fell to IR2 and the quantity of money being demanded has moved from Q1 to Q2. This means that whenever money supply would be increased, interest rates would definitely go down, and when interest rates will go down, they will encourage borrowing and would discourage saving. I have explained the same thing here also. In this diagram, you can see that I have shown a downward arrow with the interest rate, which is showing that when interest rate is going down, savings are going down and borrowings are going up. Because of a fall in savings and a rise in borrowing, aggregate demand would increase. When interest rate goes down, it is a disincentive for the savers. As a result, savers would avoid savings and would spend that money. On the other side, when interest rate is going down, that is an incentive for the borrower. As a result, borrowings will increase. Savings falling, borrowing increasing, that would lead to an increase in aggregate demand. It is obvious that when interest rate is falling, consumers would borrow more or would save less and would spend. When interest rate is going down, firms would borrow more and invest more. When interest rate is going down, government would borrow more and will invest more. And when interest rate is going down, exchange rate would go down And when exchange rate would go down, exports would increase and imports would fall. Right? However, keeping the discussion simple for the time being, just consider the consumption, investment and government expenditure only. That whenever interest rate will go down, that would cause an increase in consumption, that would cause an increase in investment and an increase in government expenditure. As a result, aggregate demand would increase. Now let's consider these two diagrams. In both the diagrams, I have labeled price level on the y-axis and national output on the x-axis. In both the diagrams, I have shown that aggregate demand is increasing. You can see in the diagram that AD1 is shifting to AD2 there. In the first diagram, I have shown the short-run aggregate supply curve. Mind it that SRAS is short-run aggregate supply curve. And in the second diagram, LRAS is long-run aggregate supply curve. In the short run, supply curve is highly inelastic, but in the long run, it is perfectly inelastic. These two diagrams are actually giving here the monetarist point of view, the classical point of view here. According to classical economists, according to monetarists, short-run aggregate supply curve is highly inelastic and long-run aggregate supply curve is perfectly inelastic. Because in the long run, full employment level would be reached, and when full employment level would be reached, supply curve would become perfectly inelastic. Classical or monetarist economists strongly believe that whenever aggregate demand would increase, that would definitely cause an increase in price level. In the short run, supply curve being highly inelastic, whenever aggregate demand would increase, that can increase output to a certain extent, but here also price level would definitely go up. However, in the long run, supply curve being perfectly inelastic, whenever aggregate demand curve would shift upward, whenever aggregate demand would increase, since full employment level has already been achieved, then only price level would increase. In the first diagram, you can see that when aggregate demand curve is shifting upward from AD1 to AD2, that is causing an increase in output from Y1 to Y2, but price level is also increasing from P1 to P2. So, classical or monetarist economists believe that even in the short run also, an increase in aggregate demand due to an increase in money supply would create inflation. And in the long run, when money supply would be increased and economy would be at full employment level, that would only cause inflation. National output would not at all increase. So keep this in mind, that classical or monetarist economists believe that even it is the short run or it is the long run, whenever due to an increase in money supply, aggregate demand would increase, that would cause inflation in both the cases. The same thing can be understood with the help of Fisher's equation. This equation was derived by the Irving Fisher, and it was actually MV is equal to PT, but the Cambridge version of the equation is MV is equal to PY. This MV is equal to PY equation actually explains the quantity theory of money. M here stands for money stock or money supply. V is velocity of circulation. P is price level and Y is national output. M is for money supply, that is quite simple. But here you must understand that what velocity of circulation means. Obviously, any currency note, for example, a note of $1 is not only used once by one individual only, right? One note actually travels to many people. For example, if a $1 note is passing through 5 persons, so that money supply of $1 is creating an impact of $5. For example, A is buying something from B from $1, B is buying from C is buying from D is buying from E, and E is again buying something from A. Then in this circle, $1 note has been spent 5 times. So actually, the $1 note is not creating the demand of $1 only, that is creating a demand for $5. So the overall impact of money supply does not depend on money supply only. We have to multiply the money supply with the velocity of circulation, and when we'll multiply the M with V, then we'll find out the final impact of total money supply. M into V can also be referred as overall aggregate expenditure. How much money is there and how many times each unit of money is being used. So we can simply have aggregate expenditure. And on the other side, Y stands for the volume of output, the units of output being produced. And when we will multiply that Y with the price of each good, we will find the value of GDP. So P into Y can be referred as the value of GDP. M into V can be referred as overall aggregate expenditure, because total money supply multiplied by the velocity, how much times each currency note is used, we can find out the aggregate expenditure. Now, rearranging the equation, we can make it the equation for price level. You can see there on the screen, price is equal to MV over Y. In order to calculate the price level, we can use this equation. Price level is equal to money supply into velocity of circulation divided by the national output. According to classical or monetarist economists, V and Y in the equation are actually a constant. Classical economists especially believed that velocity of circulation hardly changes. Velocity of circulation changes only in the long run. In the short run, it is constant. And at full employment level, national output is also constant. That's why in the long run, Y is a constant in the equation and V also is a constant. Therefore, they can be removed. An equation can be rewritten as P is equal to function of money supply. It means that price level is a function of money supply. Whenever money supply would rise, price level would rise. Whenever money supply would fall, price level would fall. In the language of Milton Friedman, inflation every time and everywhere is a monetary phenomena. According to him, changes in money supply are the only determinant of the price level. Whenever the central bank would increase money supply, price level would increase. Whenever the central bank would reduce money supply, price level would go down. Actually, Milton Friedman rejected the demand side and supply side theories of inflation. He only believed that inflation can be initiated by a demand shock or supply shock, but the persistency of the inflation is only because of an increase in money supply. And inflation can become persistent only when the central bank is increasing money supply, and if the money supply would be kept in control, price level would remain in control. So according to classical and monetarist economists, money supply is the only reason behind the inflation. Whenever money supply would go up, inflation would definitely take place. However, the John Maynard Keynes has a different view over that, but for the time being, we are not discussing that, and we will discuss that sometimes later. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you understand the monetary inflation now, and if you like the video, please click the like button. Please share the video for the benefit of others, and please subscribe my channel. Thank you very much.